Welcome to a look at a product most people thought craft distilling had moved beyond. White whiskey, unaged whiskey, White Dog. Some call it moonshine, but that's a slightly different take, and we'll talk about that too. White whiskey isn't vodka. It isn't raw alcohol. It's got more flavor than that. It helps me to think of it as similar to white rum or Blanco tequila, both popular spirits that are also enjoyed in their aged versions. It's a spirit with flavor. I remember getting a taste of Maker's Mark bourbon right off the doubler and noted at the time that it tasted like warm vodka, but the best vodka I've ever tasted with sweet corn overtones. I also believe that this is a spirit that deserves another look. There was a flurry of white whiskeys about 8 or 10 years ago when everyone seemed to jump in, even big distillers like Heaven Hill and Buffalo Trace. But a lot of those white whiskeys were necessity bottlings done because startups just had to get some cash flow. And sometimes they didn't really have a full grasp on distilling yet. There were some pretty nasty white whiskeys on the shelf in those days, and in my opinion, the very idea suffered from it. Most people I know are still scared to try one. So today, I'm joined by two distillers who've been selling white whiskey for years, and I'm here to tell you, it's good. I'm joined by Jared Adkins, the founder of Bluebird Distilling in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and Michael Myers, the founder of Distillery 291 in Colorado Springs. Hey, guys.
Hey, Lew. How are you?
Good to be here. We're here to talk about the clear stuff today for a change. I'd like to ask both of you guys for just kind of an opening statement. Where your distillery is, what kind of stuff you do, and talk a little bit about your white whiskey. Jared, you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lew, I'm in your neck of the woods, obviously. We're in Pennsylvania here, kind of the birthplace of rye whiskey, and we'll talk later about that's kind of the reason I chose to make a white rye whiskey. But we've been around for about 8 years, and we distribute in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and California, but really strong in our home base of Pennsylvania. And our white rye whiskey was our first spirit. It's still going strong 8 years later, and that's developed into a fine aged rye whiskey, along with the slew of other whiskeys as well.
Great, thanks. Mike?
Yeah, Lew, I started Distillery 291 Colorado whiskey about 11 years ago, and actually 11 years ago, a couple of weeks. And I started with white whiskey, or that was my plan. I felt that we had an American white spirit take the place of vodka, rum, tequila, or gin. And my first white that came off is called 291 Fresh Colorado whiskey. And it is a bourbon mash. And then I did a white rye, which was my second recipe. And it's 291 Colorado rye whiskey White Dog. And so, yeah, we're in 28 states. The white whiskey mainly is in Colorado. We're growing that a little bit as lately. Our biggest state is Colorado, our home state. But when I started this, I had never brewed beer or distilled. And actually, these two are my very first recipes and experiments.
I would have to say, full disclosure, he sent me samples of each of these for another story that I did actually on White Dog. And I got to say, if this is your first recipe and first distilling, you latched on pretty quick.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was a fashion and beauty photographer in New York, and 9/11 changed my life, and read an article, thought I could brand a whiskey, and then somebody said, why don't you try and make it? I started in 300 square feet, and literally the bourbon was the 291 Fresh was 80% corn. 80% corn, 20% malt rye. I changed it by 1% and took 1% of the malt rye and put malt barley in there. And that's the recipe today. And then the rye White Dog is 61% malt rye and 39% corn. And yeah, I wanted to try and have some cash flow going. and you spoke about it about distilleries 10, 11 years ago were even the big guys were in, and some of the craft people weren't making really clean cuts, and it really hurt the market for white whiskey. But it's on a revival right now.
I think so. You talked about the cuts, and I think most of our listeners know what that is. But just really briefly, when you first start getting the stream off a pot still, when you're getting the actual distillation going, the first flow out and the last flow out are the stuff you want to literally cut off, leaving the clean middle. And that was actually that was my first question. Either of you, is there a difference in how you do your white whiskey and what you then put in the barrel? I know some distillers have told me they do the cuts differently for spirit that's intended to be aged and spirit that's intended to be bottled unaged. Is it just the same stuff you put in the barrel?
Yeah, I can start real quick for us. So typically, whenever we do a clear spirit cut, that being our white whiskey, a rum, or a vodka, I tend to like to go to take the hearts very clean. So I do a much tighter cut there. For the difference between us, when I'm going in a barrel, I'm kind of judging what it's going to sit for. It's going to sit for 5 or 10 years. I'm putting a little bit more tails into it, and we've experimented kind of going deeper with them and pulling them back. But for the white whiskey, I really want my white rye to be super clean and come out more peppery, more clean, get away from those more fusel oils and some of the, I like to say, kind of stinky cheese flavors of there. It's what they smell like at the end for us coming off it almost. But I like to get it nice and clean. So for us, I'm always really diligent. If it's going to be used as a white whiskey or a vodka, I'm taking a very tight cut.
I know I've been around, what used to be my local distillery, Dad's Hat, Mountain Laurel Spirits in Bristol, Pennsylvania. And man, you could always tell when you went in and they were hitting the tails. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Stinky Chase is actually polite, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Mike. Yeah. So my cuts are the same.
Okay.
I set out, like I said, I'd never distilled, and when I started, and it was coming to the head cut can be a percentage cut, or it's fairly easy to make that decision. When it comes to the tails, I just was like kind of in the dark, and I figured out if I took, I had a 45-gallon still, so not a lot of whiskey was coming off, but if I took a mason jar every 10 proof and collected, so every time it was dropping at the end of the run, I was able to pour that back and decide what percentage or proof and all like that to make those cuts. And those two cuts were made, decided in my 300 square feet, literally, 11 years ago. So, and they haven't changed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you just kind of scaled it up I assume you're not on the same still.
I am not, but my original still is my thump keg to my 300-gallon still.
Awesome.
So
that's cool.
Yeah.
So that's what I know. I've there's a lot of disagreement about. Well, not disagreement. There's different thoughts about how tight your cuts are, how loose your cuts are. I've talked to distillers who just want things as clean as possible. And I've talked to Lance Winters is the guy I'm thinking of, who's just convinced that everyone is cutting things too tight and you really need to get more flavor. And it's really all about, and I talk about this all the time. One thing is not better or worse. It's different, so if it comes out well,
it's the art of distillation. That's where the craft and art is in that cut.
When I first poured these, I was like, the rye, I definitely like the rye better. And now I'm just like, God, but see, and this is the thing, I'm a neat whiskey sipper, and I know these are, and we'll get to this later, that mostly these are cocktail spirits. but I'm sitting here. I'm honest to God enjoying this, and I think there's something to that. So, which brings me to my next question. And I, honest to God, that was an unintended segue. I was just grooving on the whiskey there. What do you think of that white rum Blanco tequila comparison? Is there as much flavor in a grain spirit as there is in rum or tequila? Does that work?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jared.
I think so. It's funny that so my white dog actually seconds for my vodka. So my white rye is then put back into my still and I run it through both columns.
Oh,
so I have
okay.
a Cote 1000 liter. So it's kind of neat. I come out my first run, which is kind of typical to Cote. I can come out at 155 proof my first run, and I do just one run whiskeys. They have a lot of oils left into them. I think they're more flavorful for the way my still wants to run. But that same whiskey I put right back in the still, and then I run it through both columns for a second time, and then come out at 190. Same recipe, but the pepper intensifies. So you have more of the kind of nuttiness and chocolate and rye flavors in the actual whiskey. But when it gets up to the vodka, I have more of a peppery note to it. And I love it. But new vodka drinkers or new craft vodka drinkers have came in and they've actually mentioned, they're like, is this tequila? I kind of take offense to that sometimes, but we've had the true diehards that come in and say they like a rye-based vodka. And it's if you're going to base a corn-based to a rye-based, you can absolutely tell the difference. So I think there's a lot of comparisons. And our white rye has been used for margaritas a lot of times as a substitute here at local breweries and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of difference between, or even I say like terroir, but based on the rye spiciness versus like a rum or a tequila aspect of it.
So I agree. Mine are distilled three times pot distilled. I do a stripping run down to 35% and then do a finish run with a thump keg. There's no heat to my thump keg, so it's not a doubler, it's a thump keg. And my white dog definitely has been compared to tequila they're like, I kind of tastes like or smells like tequila. And I think that a lot of that's from the copper and the still that gives it that note. Yeah, we use ours for all kinds of stuff. I mean, we drink it neat, but White Dog and Tonic is a phenomenal drink. We make those all the time. And then might be 3 years now.
Pandemic time, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, exactly. I trademarked Whiskerita, which I've been drinking Whiskeritas and making Whiskeritas since day one. Actually before that, but with the white whiskey. One of my first events, still on the hill in Breckenridge, I made Whiskeritas and tried to trademark it then and just didn't have the cash, and finally went back and trademarked it. So it's the 5th cocktail to ever be trademarked, and it's phenomenal. And people love margaritas with white whiskey,
even if they don't know. I would assume.
Yep.
Yeah. I just think that I've been to a tequila distillery one time. I went to El Tesoro on a press trip, and I still remember something that the owner told us. He compared the Blanco, Reposado, and Añejo to a painting, and he said, the Blanco is like it's a watercolor of the agave field. And he said, and then the Reposado puts a frame around it, and you're kind of looking more at the frame maybe sometimes. And then he says, the Añejo, it's one of those big frames with the curlicues in it. And they said they put a coat of varnish on the painting, and like, yeah, and this is the thing. This is the way to. I mean, I tell people all the time, if you really want to taste what a Scotch distillery's spirit is like, you don't want the 20-year-old. You want the 10-year-old or even an 8-year-old. If you want to find out why that distillery's spirit is different, it's not just wood management. It's the character, the spirit going in. And this is like the ultimate like that. Jared, I know you've told me that that you mentioned that to people on tours, that this is how the spirit tastes. This is how it would have tasted 200 years ago.
And I actually love, for being from Pennsylvania, we have so much rich heritage of rye whiskey in general. But my big thing, if I'm taking someone through a tour, is, hey, if you want to know what George Washington was drinking in the colonial time, here's what it is. It's in a glass. I did my white whiskey specifically 80% raw rye, 20% rye malt, because back then they were using rye malt and they were germinating their rye grains. So I was just trying to actually go as close as possible to that. I love the rye taste. But that was the cool aspect of saying, like, here's all of your bread or your stock all melted down basically into this bottle of whiskey. One, it can be used as cash in the old days. But two, it's just the essence of what rye really tastes like back in there. And to go again, like when we were first making our white rye, I probably put 20 different yeast. I did so many batches and I kept running each through the still. And the one or two yeast that I really liked was a standout. It was actually some taste thinner, some taste thicker, some had more body, less body. So right away, we kind of started with the best tasting, in my mind, the best tasting white rye that I could make. That was
still distinct after the distillation.
Extremely.
Awesome.
It was like night and day, very easy, almost like drinking a Belgian beer compared to like an American yeast or British yeast. It was very transparent on just the yeast quality that I was using. Yeah.
That was one of the things I still remember, and I'm sorry, I'm going completely off track here.
Sure.
Victory Brewing, you're familiar with them. Yeah. I remember back, I think they'd only been open about 6-7 years. They made a batch of pale ale and split it, and did one with a Chico American yeast, very clean, and one with I think it was the Fuller's yeast.
Yeah.
And it was like, it literally was two different beers, and it was one of the most enlightening things I can remember any brewery in America doing. It was just such a, and this, people are starting to do this in distilling, and I'm really kind of excited about it. Because it does make a difference.
I took a distilling class 10 years ago. I won't mention names because this person is very prominent in the distilling industry. They told me during that class, and I'm from the brewing industry, so I kind of already knew yeast, that yeast did not matter for spirits. You could use any yeast and you would get it. I'll tell you later who it was because you're going to laugh. But I remember
that's unbelievable.
I wasn't even distilling at the time, and I'm like, this seems pretty crazy. So you're saying like you're worried about your grain, but you're not worried about any, different esters or whatever.
I got to tell you, some of them don't worry about the grain. It's just, is there a high yield? Is it efficient? Great, we'll use that one.
Yeah.
Taste, flavor? That'll come in from the barrel. Okay, all right. But, honestly, that's another thing. And this is what in brewing, you'll know this. There's no place to hide.
Yeah.
It's like brewing a lager. You're just, there you are, Yeah, I taste nothing wrong here.
Yeah, so when I started, I wanted rye, and I didn't know, so I went down to a home brew shop, and I had 50-pound bag of corn, first fresh batch, 50-pound bag of corn, and I knew I wanted rye, and I knew I needed malt, and they had malted rye. I'm like, well, I'll use that, and I'm dead serious. And so I bought enough to make an 80-20, with malted rye. And then when I went back, the white of that was so good. I went back and for my White Dog, the rye whiskey, I just used, 61% malt rye, and just loved the flavor of it. And what I learned was later in an experimental batch that I do, 291E, which is experimental batches, I did 100% malt rye just to see what it would do and what it tastes like. And what I realized in that is how sweet malt rye is. So, it's got the pepper, spice, and all like that, but it's very sweet compared to raw rye.
Yeah. Huh. We haven't really talked about this, but they're both called whiskey, and the federal regulations don't specify any minimum time in the barrel. They just say it has to be stored in that container. I remember, you guys probably know about the Pabst made a white whiskey, and right on the label it said aged 5 seconds. And from what I understand, I'm pretty sure I heard an interview one time with the guy who made it for, I can't remember what distillery did it for him. I was just looking at it the other day, but anyway, he said essentially 5 seconds was the amount of time it took to dump the barrel full of whiskey, and then pour it out, and that's why it was 5 seconds. But so, what do you call your spirits on the cola? Are they just like dump aged, or are we just rolling ahead here? I don't know.
So I ran into a huge
Don't
problem.
get yourselves in trouble.
No,
So
go ahead,
the
Jared.
classification of whiskey is it is a spirit aged in a barrel. So when I first opened my white rye whiskey, I put this name on the cola, seeing other products. I put it in, and they came back and said, "Well, you can't call it that." And I said, "Well, why? Well, why not?" And I said, "It's a category that says it's not. You have to age your product. You need to call it white rye, and then it would be a specialty spirit." So I went through the loophole, or not the loophole. I went through round in circles, but I really wanted that word whiskey on my front label to let people know what it was in that aspect.
Sure.
So what I ended up settling with is something similar to your guys. If you can see it, aged for 1 day in oak. We have a barrel that's cut. It goes in that barrel and it comes out the other side, and it's not even barely aged anymore, but it touches it and it goes through. But it's kind of silly that we weren't able to grow, and I don't know how it is now. But at that time, they knew it was a category, but it was just having to do stuff like that and work around it to be able to get out that white dog. So.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get your cola, Jared?
I remember in the beginning, I can't remember fully, but it was back like 10 times back and forth to figure out that first one.
Yeah, mine took 4 months.
Yeah, it was probably something long like that.
I was literally maybe even a little longer, and I was trying to sell it, during the holidays because I started distilling in September, and it just wouldn't go through. And it was so frustrating. And exactly that. They're like, well, how can it be white if it goes in a barrel? And I'm like, it's a used barrel. And, oh my God. And they're like, I mean,
you can't do that.
So many. And then the amazing thing back then, they would tell me that it couldn't look like this. It needed to look like that. And I would fix it. And the next one would kick it back and say, no, it needs exactly what I fixed. They would be like, no, it needs to be the other way. And I'm like, this is crazy. And I called them finally, and they said, okay. And the next, email was approved. I'm like, great. But yeah, my understanding is I think it's changed for white whiskey my fresh does not need to go on wood. It's considered a corn whiskey because it's 80% or more.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that's the only spirit that can go in a bottle with a whiskey that can go in a bottle without going on oak. But I think that might have changed lately. Someone kind of mentioned that to me, and I need to check into it because filling up a barrel and dumping it just for a loophole is
it's silly.
Especially because technically then it's a used barrel and you can't use it again if you have to. Yeah, it's just.
Well, I don't know.
So I guess what Jared. Sorry, there we go. I'm still getting this. You told us about why rye. It's the Pennsylvania connection. How did you come to rye in Colorado? My goal was to make aged whiskey, but also start out with, it's really funny actually, with white whiskey. But I was going to just do 291 fresh. Because it's corn, there's not a lot of character to it. It's closer to vodka, people, all those things. And I love Thomas Handy. So I mimicked somewhat the ratio of rye to corn that's in Thomas Handy for my rye whiskey, but mine's malt rye, things like that. I don't have any malt barley in it. But so I distilled, and 2 weeks after distilling, I went to the Colorado Distillers Guild tasting in Rack House Pub in Stranahan's, and there were like 6-7 distilleries there, maybe a few more, and they were both 125 proof out on my table, white, because and so I was pouring them, people were tasting them, and the master distiller or head distiller of Stranahan's with about 4 other guys came walking out, and that was Rob Dietrich,
who does Blacken now, a dear friend now. And they came out to my table and they're like tasting it, and they tasted, the rye, and they're like, that's the best White Dog we've ever tasted. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like,
that can't be.
Seriously. And so in that group was Eric Jett, and Eric Jett just could tell me all kinds of notes, just his palate's crazy, and that he can tie it to different notes really easily. And so I really liked him, and I went back to Mike Bristol Brewing Company, who had helped me a little bit, and told him I found my first hire. And I stayed in contact with Eric, and he, 3 years later, he wasn't working at Stranahan's. He was in between, and I started him as freelance, and now he's my head distiller and distills all my product.
Nice.
And yeah, they're all friends now. But that's how they're like, you need to put this in a bottle. And back then, walking into a bar with one white whiskey was hard enough. Now I'm walking in with two. And so, yeah.
I don't really want either of them. Get out of here.
That's how that happened.
Cool. So, talking about that, selling it to people, that's kind of the nut of this. Who buys this stuff? Who drinks it? And how are they drinking it? And to also touch on something we've already touched about, I'm going to pull in what I had as a separate question and throw this into the mix as well. What does white whiskey offer a drinker over vodka? So all of that. Who's buying it? Why are they buying it? And how do they drink it?
I could start. So when we first started, we sold our white whiskey to a lot of bars, and it was a new age. And the curb appeal was we were making this from scratch. We're a local distillery. There wasn't as many yet. So there's a lot more takers. It's kind of transpired that we still have occasional, and they use the margaritas, which is the occasional couple ones we still have. But it's circled back that now our distillery, as you've been, has a large cocktail bar with it. And we end up now seeing it more, especially the last year. It's been almost a revitalization of people coming in. And for the whiskey flight, they're actually asking for the white whiskey particularly.
Really?
And our numbers are up on white whiskey. It's not huge, but it's always a category I like to have because people are interested in the actual whiskey nuts. They're the people that are more interested. They're interested in tasting that. We always kind of put on our menu. I always want to display it and kind of show people what it could really be. So two of my favorite cocktails ever, the original one we started with, I wanted an old fashioned, and I did not have an aged whiskey. I soaked vanilla beans in the white rye and made a typical old fashioned that way, still on the menu. And the greatest whiskey cocktail, one of the whiskey cocktails of all time, is with white rye. And if you have this at home to make, 2 ounces of white whiskey, ½ ounce maple syrup, 2 dashes of campfire bitter or chocolate Aztec bitters. We do this still at the bar called the campfire chat. We drop a burning marshmallow in, and it tastes like a s'more. Like they're straight out. It was a bartender's creativity that came up with it as the shift drink. But still to this day, it's like the fall quintessential that we just put it on for fall and people love to take it. So there definitely is still a lot of use in it in cocktail form or just, a white rye and our aged rye. People always love comparing. This is what happens when it goes into the barrel. So.
Yeah. And with me, like making a white whiskey cocktail, when my rye came off the still, a friend of mine's bartender next door that I talk to all the time. He's been in the business for a long time and knew a lot about, did a lot of research on old spirits and stuff like that. So we had a lot of amazing conversations. And when I brought the white rye over, he tasted it and he goes, hold on. And he had a white Manhattan on the menu that he was making with another whiskey that was good white whiskey back then. It had a rugged yellow label. I can't think who it was. But he switched it out and made that, and it's rye whiskey with Lillet and maraschino liqueur, some orange bitters, and a cherry, and it's a phenomenal white Manhattan. I mean, phenomenal white Manhattan, and that's how we started. And we sell a lot of white whiskey in Colorado. It's been amazing. Jordan, that worked at Breckenridge for a long time, dear friend, came up and was like, this was years ago, and came up to me and said, we got Nielsen ratings or whatever. You sell a ton of white whiskey. How do you do that? And it was, and we're talking bottles off the shelf. We're not just talking in cocktails.
Oh, okay.
People
are
buy
coming
it
in
and
buying
take
the
it
whole
home.
thing.
Yeah.
Now, is that at your, buying at your place or buying in stores?
In stores. It's
buying
all
in
over
stores
Colorado.
is amazing. Okay.
Yeah. We sell a ton of white whiskey. We'd like to sell a lot more, and we're working on that. I was just down in Miami pushing whiskeritas and whiskerita machines because, what's
Sure.
better at the beach,
Yeah.
So that's what we've been doing. So
I'll tell you, I've actually been thinking my local brew pub does an outdoor venue during the summer, and it's huge. People come in, and I was just thinking, I ought to just buy one of those frozen drink machines and start doing that freelance on the side. And on a hot weekend, I could probably pay the damn thing off in 2 days.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've had a frozen drink machine on my bar from day one to make whiskeritas, and we do doggeries. We do with the white dog. We do daiquiris. It makes a great traditional daiquiri, and also mango daiquiri, phenomenal. But the traditional lime, simple syrup, white dog rye. It's
Right.
We've done a lot of, and I'm sure Jared's experimented with a lot of cocktails. You want to push that white whiskey. It's
for sure. I was laughing, Michael. You were saying about Jordan Vi from Breckenridge.
Yeah.
So a good buddy of mine, and he was actually one of my original. I reached out for help when I started, and I wanted to learn. And Jordan actually flew out, and me and him developed a lot of these recipes together. As you know, he's a genius. But I just remember we didn't have any alcohol the first night, and the first white rye's come off the still, and he's filling up his entire snifter off of rye out there. It's like 170 proof, and he's amazing. I mean, I have stories for days about how great of a guy he is. But we had some fun.
I had a lot of fun with Jordan. Up in Breckenridge, and So both my fresh and my white dog, fresh 3. I don't even know the dates now, but the last 3 years, the fresh one, best new make, American best new make from Whiskey Magazine, and then the white dog one, best new make the next year, and then fresh won it again this year.
Nice.
And it's been amazing. And when I first, I can't think of his name at Whiskey Magazine, but back, when I was winning some awards, I told him about White Dog and Tonic, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "It's best drink, and it's way better than gin." And I sent them bottles, and they had, they drank on Friday afternoon or whatever, and they called me after making them, and he was just like, "This is amazing." So a bunch of Englishmen drinking White Dogs and Tonic.
I haven't tried that myself yet.
That's
amazing. I have to.
Yeah, I know. When you said that at the beginning of the show, it's like, White Dog and Tonic? Really?
Yeah, a little lime juice, a little maraschino cherry juice. You can put the cherry in there, but it's just really, I don't like gin and tonics, but I love a White Dog and Tonic.
Huh. Yeah, I'm not a huge gin and tonic. My wife drinks them all the time, but then we
had a dear friend that used to come in the distillery all the time, and he loved gin and tonics, and he's like, what do you have for me? And my friend Nate was working for me, and he said, let's try this, and it was phenomenal. So
awesome. That's great. So we mentioned moonshine earlier, or at least I did. And moonshine is a somewhat fraught term in the industry because, I mean, technically moonshine is illegal whiskey. As whiskey made without a license, whiskey made without tax, and usually whiskey made, with the bare minimum of quality, skill, whatever you want to call it, because really you're just looking to make some money. Now, of course, we have commercial brands, moonshine, Old Smoky, Junior Johnson, whatever. How is what I'm drinking and what both of you have, how is that different from what people think of as moonshine? Obviously, you're not putting apple pie flavors in it or any of that stuff. But is the base spirit the same? Are they doing it, or is it's probably varies with each distillery? But I mean, that's not how you're selling it. So what's the difference?
Sure. I mean, you go
ahead,
first.
Jared. No, go ahead.
This is the tough part about the screens. We're there.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like the moonshiner episodes on TV, I feel like put this in their mind of what moonshine is. And then I always thought of like moonshine is because the shine of the moon, you're making it illegally.
Yeah.
I think, I don't want to say it gave a bad representation, but I feel like at least we have to kind of say like, oh, this is moonshine. And like, well, we're not moonshine. This is a white whiskey. It's the basis of what everything else is made from. I don't know. In my mind, I think of like moonshine as like grain neutral spirits with some cinnamon sticks, some apple pie added into it. But I guess at the end of the day, people think of white dog or white rye or white whiskey, in the realm as moonshine. So I don't know if I technically have anything wrong with it or any problems with it. I just try to teach people more so often that this is just the basis of what whiskeys are for our side. Last thing before we go, and I say moonshine, but the white dog has gotten so popular. I was even thinking that the American Whiskey Fest held in Philadelphia now, just a couple of years ago, started having an actual whole category for white whiskey for a competition style of it.
Nice.
Yeah, I know Michael's got a ton, but I never knew about that. We put our white whiskey in, and they came out and said, hey, you won this award today for best white rye out of all the other spirits. And I was like, I didn't even know you guys were doing a competition on it, but this is great. So
I can see
that category is definitely there.
I can see why Laura would want to do the organizer, the American Whiskey Convention in Philly is I mean, famously insane about grain. And
she's a rye nut.
Yeah, man. White whiskey is like her bag, Yeah, because it just brings, it puts the field right in the glass.
Yeah, no.
So, Mike, sorry.
Yeah, so for me, moonshine is, sugar shine. It's made from sugar this day and age. I mean, some people are making it with grain, but you're not, grain costs a lot where sugar, is a lot cheaper. So that's the difference to me, and flavored, we're just making white whiskey and the same way, with grain. And it's just a more elevated spirit. But I also, when I started my distillery, I have my whole story now, but I was trying to come up with a story, and I actually woke up in the middle of the night about 2 a.m. and wrote this story where I was gonna, because I live in Colorado next to Pikes Peak and Cripple Creek, where there's still a gigantic gold mine up there. They pull tons of gold out of there yearly. And I was like, well, what about the miners? The miners were from Scotland, Ireland, and they came over and they came out to be miners. And so I was thinking, they've got to have their whiskey. So they would, while they're digging for gold, there would be copper around. So they'd put the copper off to the side and be able to build their own still. This literally, I have it written down, this whole story. And that, they had some grain, from their provisions and stuff. And so they started making whiskey, and they didn't have barrels. So they just were drinking the white whiskey and, by the light of the moon after a long, hard day, and using Rocky Mountain water for it. And that was originally, what I thought about when I was going to do this. My story's true and very different from that. But it just was, back then there were all the stories about different distilleries or, having somebody's grandfather's recipe or whatever like that. So that's where it came from. The other thing that was funny once when I was at a tasting, we pour all our SKUs at tastings, and we were at Distill in Denver. It's not around anymore, but Rob Masters started it. And so I and he's with Family Jones now. But we were there and pouring white whiskey, and this guy came up with about 5 of his friends, and he's like, "Oh, white whiskey, no, white whiskey's horrible." And I'm like, "Not mine." He's like, "Oh, come on." He goes, "I've tasted so many, and they're just bad." And I'm talking, this is definitely, 7, 8 years ago. And I'm like, "Well, whatever." He goes, "Well, if you can stand the criticism, I will taste your whiskey."
I mean, I got to tell you, I am feeling this guy 100% 8 years
right.
ago.
I knew what he was talking about, but I knew what mine tasted like. And I was like, here you go. And he took it and he goes, "Damn, that's pretty good." And all his friends go, "Oh, hard criticism." Yeah. Just busted him so hard. But so many people, I mean, so many times you taste somebody's white and it's just not clean, especially back then. A lot of people have learned so much more. Stills are so different now, everything. But and speaking of the moonshiners and documentary like that, I'm self-taught, YouTube, books, and Popcorn Sutton's documentary. And in there, he's running and he pulls a little twig and he breaks it and he sticks it into the worm. And he's like, "If it comes out any thicker than that stick, it's fighting whiskey." And what I learned from that was slow your still down. It's got to trickle out. Take your time. And
fighting whiskey. There you go.
Yeah. So, right. And it's true.
That's an interesting point. I'm not a fan of young whiskey. I honestly, some of the especially young bourbon, God almighty, I don't know what it is. I would rather drink a 7-month-old rye than a 2-year-old bourbon. Usually, I'm not sure why that is. For the record, Harlan Wheatley at Buffalo Trace agrees with me. He says young bourbon just is not as good as young rye. However, the unaged stuff, I don't have a problem with drinking this at all. So would you say, I mean, if it goes in the barrel for 2 months, is it actually getting worse at first? Is there something going on there? I don't.
Yeah, Mike.
Well, that's a funny question because I don't taste what I'm aging for a longer time. I don't taste it early like that. But when I started,
probably smart.
when I started, Todd Leopold had American whiskey out. I believe it was bourbon mash bill, and I really liked it. It was different. It was pre-prohibition style, is what I think they called it, or at least that's what I call mine. So I took my bourbon and decided that I was going to put it in a 30-gallon barrel for about, I think, 5 months or something like that, and tasted it. And we, to this day, make that whiskey. It's 291 American whiskey.
Huh.
And we it's light. I call it my summer whiskey. It's, pre-prohibition style, I think, because it's not in the barrel that long. And it's my training whiskey as well. Because if I get somebody tasting that, I can get them to barrel proof in the same tasting if they've never drank whiskey. And so I call it my training whiskey, but it's my summer whiskey. It's really good. It, makes great old fashions. So I don't know.
Yeah, I remember High West was doing a whiskey they called Valley Tan for a while. I don't know if you remember that one. It was an oat whiskey, and they aged it for, I want to say 5 months, and it apparently didn't make it. I don't think they make it anymore, but I really liked it. I need to get another bottle of this because this one is just, I don't know what it was, but I can see that. Of course, on the other, I remember I liked the what the hell was it? The first Woodford Reserve that they hadn't finished in wine casks, the Sonoma-Cutrer Chardonnay. I think I'm the only person in America who liked that. Apparently, I still have 2 bottles squirreled away. I think it's a great afternoon in the sun in the hammock whiskey, and I think there's something to be said for that with these. I mean, with White Dog as well. It is it's like rum. It's a sitting out in the deck and kicking back. I mean, I don't have anything against drinking like a 12-year-old bourbon with a cube in the sun, but this stuff is kind of gets you in the mood quicker, I think.
Your last question there, Lou. I'm curious if Michael ever ran into this. So when I first started as well, I tasted every single month for the barrels, and I found a really interesting piece that it was almost like an upside down bell curve and then a bell curve. So almost that the whiskey would start, the white whiskey would be better, and then I'd go through months where it would progressively get worse, and I would taste heads and tails.
God, that had to worry you.
These are things that I'm thinking, and then it would come back up to the sweetness level, and then it would start its rise up to sweeter. But it always seemed like the first 5-6 months of the rye, I was finding all these different flavors in my head, in my palates. I knew what I was, looking for and what flavors I wanted. But it almost got worse before it got better once it got in the barrel. Like it was working out the tannins first. The tannins were mellowing, and then it was building on the sweetness characteristics after that.
Yeah, so kind of get shocked by the barrel at first.
Yeah, it seemed like, and it was picking up probably more of the upfront wood notes, maybe that was on the surface instead of the deep sugars and stuff like that.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, I think barrels, it's really hard when you make whiskey from grain to barrel to bottle, from scratch. It's really hard to throw whiskey out, right? So we just put it in a barrel and go, maybe it'll get better, and tasting those barrels and stuff, and all our barrels, but barrels they go down fast first, and then they come back, and they can drop again. It's a little bit of a wave where you can catch a barrel at a really good time, or if you leave it for another month or so, it'll start hitting that curve again. Sure. Really nice. So yeah, I know barrels do a lot of different things.
The guys at Suntory, we were talking about the Mizunara casks, the Japanese oak, and they swore that the stuff tasted horrible for the first 12 years. And they thought they had because they were expensive barrels to make. Apparently it's a really hard wood, and it's hard to get it to bend to make the barrels. So all the Mizunara casks tend to be fairly squat and just barely bent. But again, like you said, they couldn't bear to throw it out. And after 20 years, they went back to it and oh my God. Apparently things had finally curved the right way. But they swear up and down for the first 10 years. It's awful.
Yeah, well,
interesting.
So I also think that, the comment about not liking bourbon, young bourbon and stuff like that, or liking rye, I really think that, because Kentucky was making, or that area was making so much whiskey over the last, since Prohibition, and they've been making it very similar, across the board, not experimenting that much. And so through the time that I've been in the industry, there's been, people that are just hardcore traditional bourbon drinkers, and they would not, anything that didn't taste like in that box.
Very narrow.
Yes, very narrow. It wasn't great, and Fred Minnick, dear friend, really good friend. He was, when he first tastes mine, he's always like, oh my God, this, and he kind of blows it up, but it wasn't really true because we were doing a charity with Bourbon Crusaders, Brett Atlas, which is amazing, for a Heaven Hill release. We were the pre-cocktail or the pre-whiskey, and
the warm-up booze.
First time I met him, and he's drinking, and he was drinking it, but he always says he didn't really like it. And I told him the other day, I was like, that's because you're just a traditional bourbon drinker. That's and he's expanded tremendously over the last 5 years since I met him. And but yeah, I think that's what happened a lot in the beginning with craft whiskey. And yeah, as you well know, white whiskeys, there were some really rough ones. And then they go in a barrel and they get a little better, but.
Yeah. I mean, things have changed so much. I remember I left Whiskey Advocate at the end of 2016, and a bunch of the writers and I got together the following April, I think. So April of 2017. And, we drank as you will. And about 4 drinks in, I remember one of the writers saying, I just want to know one thing. When is a craft distiller going to make a rye whiskey that I actually want to drink? And we were all like, yes. And, I got to tell you, within 3-4 years, they were all over the place.
Yeah.
It's just, you got to learn how to do it. And enough places have to learn how to do it to make them fairly, I don't want to say common, but available enough that you're going to run into them. It was never going to happen overnight. Hell, craft brewing didn't happen overnight. There was some really kind of sketchy stuff out there. To be honest, it's happening again because there's so many places opening. But in general, right now, things are tasting really good.
Yeah. And just now, American Whiskey Magazine, Sailor Guevara just wrote a really nice article about white whiskey. We're in it.
Nice.
And yeah, it's a really nice article, and it's great to see that your article that you wrote, Lew, was amazing. It's great that there's all this, movement happening and bringing white whiskey, because white whiskey's phenomenal. I mean, and that's the other thing, like when we make a experimental batch, when it comes off the still, how good it's going to be. I mean, when you taste the white, if it doesn't taste good, you can hide it with barrel stuff. But if it comes off still and you're like, I could drink this right now, once it goes in the barrel, it's going to be phenomenal. And that's what we've done. I have a 4-grain wheated bourbon called Bad Guy. And I just reversed a little more than a year ago, reversed the recipe and made it a 4-grain wheated rye. And I've never heard of a 4-grain rye, let alone wheated. And that white dog came off the still, and it was incredibly pretty. It's such an easy drinking white whiskey. And we put it in the barrel and can't wait to taste it.
Aircraft designers have a saying: if it looks right, it flies right, and I think that applies here. If it's coming off the still well, you're going to have to screw it up in the barrel. And that's not impossible, but so I guess we're starting to get to the wind up. We've talked about this, and we've talked about how white whiskey seems to be having maybe the beginnings of a revival. We've talked about all its interesting qualities. It's a great educational tool. It's a great way to see the actual spirit character of a distillery. It's just a flat out good drink. Good for cocktails, good for sipping. I mean, I've been sipping at this the whole time. I've been enjoying myself, and I'm not forced. Well, you saw me. I actually poured more. I was, So, is this ever going to be more than a niche? Is this a curiosity? Just cocktail fuel? What's compelling about white whiskey? Why should somebody try it?
I think it'll always be there. I don't know if it'll ever be a mainstream category, but for anyone that's truly interested in whiskey, I think it's essential to figure out where it came from and to actually get the quintessential notes and flavor before it goes into a barrel. So, I mean, I think there's a lot more artistic spread in actually the white dog sometimes than there is, again, of managing your oak or aging it, because that's where the recipe starts. So, who knows? Maybe someday it could be like the IPAs and we can just have some fun of just switching up. But
yeah.
For us, I never plan on getting rid of it. I like it that it's part of my portfolio. It's, kind of our legacy. So I'm actually kind of inspired to do some more just for my aspect of the distillery. I would love to do a 150 proof kind of white lightning version and just stuff to satisfy my itch. I don't know if it'll be a huge seller, but I bet you there'll be some people that really want to come and try it.
I really think it will be mainstream. I think there's a few reasons for that. I think it's interesting enough spirit. I also think that it's a cash cow as it becomes mainstream for larger distilleries, they can, they're not paying for barrels. They can put it out in the market. I mean, okay, vodka is one thing, but I really think as well, it's kind of like spicy food, people's palates have changed, and more
Yes.
we like spicy food. We like more character to our food. And I think that's the same in the sense of white spirit. And, yes, there are vodka drinkers that don't want to taste anything but the, the cranberry juice in there or the grapefruit juice or whatever. But I think that there's enough people that really want more character to their white drinks. And I mean, my white dog, I put it in Bloody Marys, and it's phenomenal. I put my aged rye in Bloody Marys too. The rye part cuts that sweetness of the tomato juice and just makes a phenomenal drink. And I just think the more people are educated about it, the more they'll venture out. I think what's interesting about spirits or cocktails is that people, a Bloody Mary has to have vodka in it. And it's like, no, it doesn't. And the amount of times I order a rye whiskey in my Bloody Mary, bartenders and servers all go, what? Who does that? I'm like,
Yeah.
So I really think I think it's going to take a little time. I think, Jim Beam and Buffalo Trace and Heaven Hill all saw it early and tried to jump on it, and it just was too early. Jacob's Ghost and
Right.
and Buffalo Trace kind of put out 375s of their mash one. I think I'm hoping, because I really love the category. I just think it's going to take a little time, and I love this revival of it. And I think it's kind of like, online grocery shopping, back in the day in Northern California, when they started that, the logistics weren't worked out, and it just flopped.
Yeah.
And it took a good 10 years to roll back around. And now, look at Amazon. So I just think that's what's going to happen with white whiskey.
Yeah. Sometimes the ideas are ahead of the abilities.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah.
And the market.
Right. People aren't there. I mean, that classic, we have a solution. Like we don't have a problem yet.
Yeah.
And then when it comes together, always like, yeah. I just, for myself, I'm still waiting for that to happen with Aquavit. I'm not holding my breath. Just a big fan, but there was one thing I remembered. I did one of these a couple weeks ago with Irish whiskey, and we talked briefly about poitín. Poitín, of course, is also an unaged grain-based spirit. The Irish seem to believe that it is different. It is theirs alone because of different cuts, and also because they like it strong as bejesus. They seem to think that unless it's at least 120 proof, it's not really poitín. Like, well, okay, but again, just the thing that the fact that they're making it and selling it. I mean, people are buying it. I think that's more support to this this idea that there are some new legs to the category, the subcategory, whatever you want to call it. Have you guys come across anybody in America making poitín or?
I did. I don't know if they're still around or not. Literally, when I started, sometime in March of 2012, I think ADI had an event in Kentucky, and there was a guy there, really nice guy, really funny, and he was making poitín, and I actually tasted it, and I was like, that is not my jam. And I don't know if it was because it wasn't clean. I don't know if it was just so new. I just was not ready for something like that.
I got to tell you, man, I've talked to some Irish drinkers, and they're like, "There's a reason they rub it on racehorses."
Yeah, it was not my jam, and so, but they won, something at ADI. They won a medal for it, and I was like, wow.
Only entry in the category.
Could have been that different, but I think they were a distillery out of South Carolina. I just don't remember his name. I'd have to think about it. But yeah, that's the poachine I've come across. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's going to wrap us up. If there's anything else, either of you, I think we've covered it. I mean, I know I've had a good time drinking your stuff here, but and of course I always have a good time drinking your stuff, Jared. As you know, I'm a big fan of your wheat whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really enjoy that stuff.
I got something from Michael. I actually don't know if you remember this, Michael, that we met 9 years ago. And I came in and tasted your White Dog in a grocery store or liquor store in Denver or Aurora area. And we had a whole conversation. I was telling you about my distillery that was just starting off. I doubt. Do you remember that at all?
I remember your face, but I don't.
Yeah.
So,
but it was funny. I was in a liquor store, and then there was Distillery 291, and I was learning all about it and tasting through or whatever. And we probably talked like 20 minutes still. But it's just funny. It's just like
it was
more recognizable to me from that aspect.
It was probably now Davison.
Yeah, I think it was. So I have a lot of family that lives in the Denver and Aurora area, so I was out there a bunch. So, but yeah, it's just a small world. How everything kind of comes around.
That's really So it's good to see you again. But yeah, we poured a ton of white whiskey. Tasting and it's funny, when you do a tasting, you as you do so many, you kind of not judge, but you're like, okay, what's this person going to want? Are they going to want rye? And with the white dog, there was a specific type of person that would come up and they would taste it and be like, oh my God, I love this. And other ones would be like, nope, not my jam. This certain type of person would come up, and every time I was like, they're going to like White Dog. And my team would be like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, they taste it.
Nice.
And it just was a funny thing I noticed, so, but yeah, I'm excited about being a part of the White Dog revival and grow it. I love it and love making it.
Yeah,
we sell ours in the PA Fine Wine and Spirits here, and actually it's been going strong for the last 6 or 7 years there, and it stays as a category, and people are actually moving through it. So kind of a nice representation for us.
Do they shelve it with the whiskeys?
It's shelved. So, I mean, thankfully for us being in kind of PA and it's our state, but I have like the white rye, the rye, everything's right across it. So it's in there sitting on the shelf with the other whiskeys. So at least if you're picking up one of our aged products, you look over and probably wonder what this is. That's probably why people are picking it up to actually take it home if they actually enjoy our aged whiskeys.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, I think it's time to go. Can you, each of you, again, tell us where you're from and where people can find you and stop by and have a cocktail?
Sure.
Michael?
Okay. I'm Michael Myers, founder and CEO of Distillery 291. We make 291 Colorado whiskey in Colorado Springs, Colorado, from grain to barrel to bottle. You can find us on our website. We ship to, or through a third party, ship to 31 states, I think. We're opening in about 28 states right now. And Colorado, come visit us. Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak is the mountain behind us, and it's beautiful. And we have a really nice tasting room and tours.
Excellent. Jared?
Awesome. Jared Adkins from Bluebird Distilling in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. The new upcoming, one of the best towns in Phoenixville, I like to say.
Phoenixville booze scene is incredible for a town its size.
We have six breweries now, 6 breweries on the same street. I am the anchor distillery on the corner. We have a 4,000 square foot cocktail bar now that we keep adding on to. And besides making over 22 different spirits available in Pennsylvania, Jersey, Delaware, California, we ship directly to anywhere in Pennsylvania. Haven't did the third party yet. Want to do it to other states. But come see us. The town is absolutely awesome. And our cocktail menu is second to none for what we're doing with our spirits and just kind of the versatility we're doing. So pretty exciting place, pretty exciting town. So come and check us out. And
you still have the place down in the Bourse?
So we don't have the Bourse, but as you know, recently we just got into the coffee business. So my newest venture, Bluebird's newest venture, Char and Stave Coffee Company. It is coffee by whiskey people. So we added in a roaster into our distillery, and our head distiller is actually a coffee fanatic and an amazing roaster. So now our flagship there is we are using our used bourbon barrels, and we're aging a bunch of coffee beans. And we opened a flagship location in Ardmore, which is now not only coffee, but it's mostly coffee and whiskey cocktails combined together. So if you like coffee and whiskey, it's the best of both worlds. And now we're just having fun merging the two together. So that's my spiel.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lou.
It's been a great show.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you for
really nice to be with you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
So thank you for joining us here at Bevridge. I'd like to remind you that we have these talks every Wednesday at 8:45 Eastern, 5:45 Pacific. That's live. Then they're also taped as well. Stop by and visit. Say hi. Learn something about booze. It's a good time. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Lew Bryson.